Let me just get one thing done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Alright. Cool.
And your name again?
Andrew Taylor.
Andrew.
Yes. It is October 23rd at 1:12. We are in Dr. Loughlin's office. Do I have your permission to use the recording on the website and social media?
Of course.
Okay. Name and position, please.
Michael Loughlin, Professor of History, Ohio Northern University.
Okay. Now, how long have you been here?
This is year 30.
Okay. Why did you decide to come to this university?
I came here because they offered me a tenure track job, and Wright State offered me 4 years. And it was closer to home, and that was the selling thing. I didn't necessarily want to be in a small city, but I knew I was close to Toledo and Columbus and Dayton, and South Bend is 3 hours away, so it seemed like a centrally located.
All right. Now, what do you remember about the interview?
I remember that not all the department was there, and Professor Loughlin, who retired in 2008, was at the end of the table working while I was being interviewed, and that the person who did the most talking was brand new in the department, which irritated somebody else. I didn't know that other person was irritated, but apparently he was. And then the woman that was going to become the chair within 10 years, she was not there, and she came later. And then they took me over to Lima, and they took a circuitous route to get to Lima. I didn't really know what Lima was like. And at one point, I think I went out to dinner with the guy that was chair. I can't remember exactly when I went to that dinner. It might have been when I first came here. But I drove over from South Bend and had never heard of Ada, Ohio, although I had been in Lima before, and I had driven through this area, but 4 miles away.
Okay. Now, what was the department like when you started? Who was here? And
Well, who was here? There were 3 elder statesmen, Professors Saffel, Loughlin, and Davis. There was the new hire, John Lomax. Ellen Wilson and Joanne Scott were in the department. And I was replacing somebody who had left apparently at the last minute. So they got me literally a week before classes began.
Oh, yikes. Now, what was the name of the department at the time?
It was called History, Politics, and Justice, I believe. It had the criminal justice program, which was removed from our department about 8 years ago without even talking to the person who set up the criminal justice program. And it went downstairs. I don't know the status of that program. And Professor Scott, who was the person who created the criminal justice program here, she just died about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And we've changed since then and gotten a focus on geography. And we've brought in, obviously younger people. The older ones have gone. And I got here when I was, I think, fairly young. And now I am the oldest one, for better or worse. So I wish I could start over again, but it has been an interesting 30 years. A lot of changes, but the department has been fairly stable. And I've noticed that when one person leaves and another person comes in, things change, but a lot stays the same. It's still the focus on teaching, working with students closely, and students normally feel at home up here.
All right. Now, what courses did you teach back then?
I was basically Western political thought and American foreign policy, which were not part of my graduate training. But I took classes as an undergraduate in foreign policy, and foreign policy and philosophy. And I was always interested in philosophy, so to go into political philosophy, and my research was on politics and some philosophical issues. So I was very interested in doing that. It didn't scare me when they said, you're going to be teaching this, because history, if you're not interested in everything, then you really aren't a historian. Mm-hmm. Because in history, that's what it's all about. It's being interested in everything, from the environment to politics to the presidency to the international situation to climate. The whole thing is part of an ongoing look at the world, the culture, entertainment, everything. And someone who's interested in history should be interested in everything. The opposite of one of our former presidents, George W. Bush. The one person described him as he was the most incurious person in the world. Well, maybe that was not justified, and he's been finally speaking out recently about some of the problems he sees going on in the current administration. But curiosity, I would think, would be the essential element in a historian, and trying to be objective as possible, which is not always easy, because politics tends to color one's interpretation of events, and it's hard to separate the events from your current biases and prejudices, but that's the goal.
Yeah. How have the courses changed from then to now?
We've gone from from quarters to semesters. I like it much better, although students liked the idea that they're in and they're out in 10 weeks. Mm-hmm. But for preparation, it makes preparation much easier. It makes assigning papers much easier. It gives us much more flexibility in what we can do and what we choose to do. And we can expect students to write a 10 or 12-page paper, mm-hmm. and spend a month looking at the topic, or more, or maybe 2 months or 3 months. Mm-hmm. And you don't have as many separate preparations, so there's not as much constant worrying about the next class, because we used to teach 4 classes 3 times a year, 12 preparations, yeah. Even though there's some overlap because we repeat the classes. But anyway, that was, and then then vacation, you only got a couple weeks, and it's nice to get a month over Christmas. Mm-hmm. If you really work hard, I think you need that time away to come back and be refreshed. Right. 2 weeks is not enough.
Yeah, I agree. Now, how have things changed since 2008 when the economy took a hit? How has the department kind of worked through it?
We seem, and I'm not an expert on this, but I know that everybody has had problems, and partly funding from Washington. Mm-hmm. When Washington wants to cut taxes, yeah. That means the state doesn't get as much help. When the state doesn't get as much help, they don't give as much help to education. And they were giving help to private schools. And when the state has a crunch, the private schools are going to be cut out. So the federal government says, well, we're going to save you money. And then they're going to save money by not giving you what you need and not giving the states what they're used to. And as a result, local Republican conservative little towns like Ada are having to increase taxes to meet the shortfall that the states and the local community don't have. So you have the irony of people who run on small government, low taxes, have to push taxes and do more because the federal government is basically arguing that we're going to cut taxes for everybody, which everybody's for low taxes. But if you get taxed in the school, you get taxed for the library, you're taxed for your property, you're taxed by the local city. It's I think maybe there's a little irony in what's going on, but I think that's changed, and there was a trend for the last 50 years. The Rust Belt was coming. Mm-hmm. People were moving to the south and the southwest, and the demographics for small colleges were not good. Ohio Northern, because we've got 4 professional schools, has managed to withstand that pretty well. But, there are problems, and we've lost, what would be the percentage? We've probably lost about 20% of the student population. I think it's been getting better in the last couple of years, but that's definitely been a problem. And as the economy has gone bad, people are more concerned, what can I do to make a living immediately? When I went to college, it was, it was an expanding economy. You didn't worry about it. I didn't worry about making a living until I had to go out and make a living, and then it started to work. But students today are starting to think, well, what can I do? So back then it was find yourself, explore, and anybody that thought they knew what they were doing was suspect, was an anomaly. Now lots of students come in, they think they know exactly what they want to do, and economically that makes sense, but nobody knows who they are. And university life, being away from home for the first time for most students, is a chance to find out what you are, who you are, what you're interested in, what's there. And you don't know that. If you know that when you're 16, what does that say about your future? I mean, how many people find that out by the time they're 18 or even 21? So the role of the university has changed. And this change has been going on for a long time. The focus on job, the focus on career, the focus on skills that are useful. Instead of exploring ideas, there's a tendency to just study to market yourself, which is not much. That's a priority, and it's obviously if you're paying for it, but there's something missing in students that are too focused on getting out of here and getting a job. They're missing what the university life should be. So, in history and political science, and maybe even in geography, there's some of the application, like the social studies program for teaching. You got to go through all those classes. You don't take those classes, you're not going to get out of here in 4 years if you're lucky. So they're making you run the gauntlet, from what I understand. What I used to do, what Professor Crawford does a long time ago. And if you don't have, those are good classes to take, but it's not much of a choice for a student. They force you to take. And I never see students, almost never do I see a social studies major in my classes. I teach Hitler, I teach Nazism, I teach fascism, I teach modern environmental movement. You would think that those would be classes, the Holocaust, you would think that those would be classes, the French Revolution. You would think that those would be classes that anybody walking into a classroom should have. Mm-hmm. And most students don't have time.
So, what role did the history department have in general education when you started?
We were a big part of the general education program. Everybody had to take Western Civ. Mm-hmm. Some had to take 2 classes. That's my memory. Some took 1. Business got out of it. Then engineering got out of it. Pharmacy still requires it. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. But we had, when I first started, I would have 115 students. And I have had times when I'll have 30 to, now it's averaging between 30 and 60. Mm-hmm. And 60 is excellent if I get 60 students. I'm ecstatic. But I used to have standing room only. I used to have 30 students in the class. I mean, not literally standing, but 30 students in a class. And I had 2 sections of that, and then I had upper level classes with anywhere from 6 to 12, 15 students. Sometimes less, sometimes more. But we always had plenty of students. And now with the requirements are changing. So what I've done, they offer classes in the transition experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I offer a class in World War I in text in film.
Yeah.
And then the extradisciplinary seminar, I offer a class in, I did offer it in global environmentalism, and I'm offering a class in the history of the American environmental movement for an environmental studies minor. So I'm interested in those things, and we get some students in there. The World War I in text and film is a fun, don't worry about it, it's a fun class, as long as the students will read. And interest, as time goes on, I've noticed, and at least I've heard about it. I don't know if I've noticed it, but I've heard students want to read less and less and less and less and
Mm-hmm.
less. And when the freshmen came in this year, I was told, they were asked if they were reading other books besides The Circle. And the freshmen said, no, they hadn't read anything besides the book that was assigned. So, and university life in history used to be about reading books. So if students want to just go online or just go to class and take notes, well, taking notes is an art of the past. Yeah. So that's gone by the wayside. And then I've gone to PowerPoint. And the students have access to all the PowerPoints. And that's for good or bad, because that means they'll take fewer notes. And the fewer notes you take, the mind drifts off, daydreaming occurs, and you really don't have your record of what was going on in that class. Mm-hmm. So you have a disincentive to concentrate. And it's hard to concentrate on any lecture. But if you're taking notes, you've got that. So I think, the good students are always going to be fine. But it's the marginal students losing those habits that I think they're suffering. And I used to have students do tape recordings of class, mm-hmm. which is fine, but then you got to listen to the lecture all over again. Once should be enough.
Now, when we come in as early students, we hear from the older students that we should avoid the 3 L's.
Two of them one is gone, one is going, and I'll be here next year.
Okay. So should we take your courses while you guys are still here? Or?
I would say that if you want to learn something, the 3 L's I hope were good to take. What I do in my classes, I give students ideas that they do not get on Fox News. Mm-hmm. So if you come from a family that is addicted to Fox, you will be surprised when you hear what I have to say. Not that I am in love with CNN, but I think CNN at least tries to keep facts straight, although they're a little obsessed with Trump these days. Mm-hmm. But they try to keep the facts straight, and some of the commentators on Fox, they don't care about facts. They just toss out anything and they don't even check it. Mm-hmm. There's some very good people who have moved from CNN to Fox. I'm sure they're good, but some of the commentators on Fox have been. So in my classes, I ask students to read. They write. We do some controversial things, and but I expect students. I give the students the questions ahead of time, in terms of an essay. So I'm expecting that the students will support the ideas with information, with names, dates, facts. I don't believe in memorizing dates. I don't believe in memorizing the book or memorizing facts. But I do believe in putting an argument together that is supported by information. Mm-hmm. That's what I look for in an essay. I'm going to give them the answer. If they have other evidence, they can put that in there. But they need to put in evidence from the book, from the lectures, from the films we see. We always use some films. And I have students watching films in class, outside class. And I try to use YouTube feature films, documentaries, whatever I can to change what I'm doing. When I use graphics, the PowerPoint is not a lecture. The PowerPoint are images that I use to talk about the subject. And that helps me, and I hope it helps the class because it'll make it more interesting. I don't just sit there and lecture. And then I try to get discussions with the students. I don't do as much as that as I could in Western Civ, but every week and a half, I try to have something where the students are required to respond. And I quiz them. I say, we're going to have a quiz on these 30 pages, these 2 pages, these 10 pages. This book, read it. We'll have a quiz, and then we'll talk about it. And we'll spend the whole hour, most of the time, talking about what I've asked them to read.
Uh-huh.
And so some students talk, some students don't. And, I've given students credit, one whole grade, just by coming in and being prepared to talk and ask questions. I don't do it very often, but I grade on participation and attendance. So I never used to, but now I'm grading on attendance. And it's, I have some good students, interested students, and they stay awake. And you can tell when students are interested a little bit in what you're doing and when they're not.
Yeah. You talked about Western Civ just a little bit. Now, what do you remember about the Western Civ series as a whole?
I wish we still had it required. The reasons for getting rid of it are, I'm not completely certain, but what I think it is, in part, some departments were not having any majors and they were worried that they wouldn't have anything to do. So redesigning the curriculum where they could have students drawn that would be taking our classes. And maybe the Western Civ class is a little old-fashioned. In theory, we should be doing world civilization. I would not want to teach that because I have not spent my life studying India or China. I taught it once, and I found myself teaching something I was not very clear about a lot of the times. And I would, read it. It was just a textbook. And the subjects I teach, I've read dozens or hundreds or thousands of books on the topic. So if I've read dozens, hundreds, or thousands of books on something I'm opening my mouth about, rather than having read the chapter in a world civilization book. But we offer Eastern civilization. We offer a class in world civilization. I don't know how it's going or what its status is, but I think it's important. But I would much rather have somebody who's an expert on India and China and Japan teach that. And Professor Crawford has studied it and minored in it, and he teaches it. So that makes more sense to me than a whole world or Eastern civilization, unless somebody's qualified to teach it. I'm not. And it's enough trouble for me to keep the 50 countries of Europe straight and the history of 50 countries. And then what I know about the world I'll get by looking at contemporary events, because I'm interested in what's going on in the world today. But the history of India, not so much. The history of China, it's interesting. I got other things that I need to do. I can't imagine doing the history of 192 countries. Just keeping track of some of the main trends in Europe and the U.S. and the Western Hemisphere is about all I can do. And then foreign policy is a different thing. So you've got to be interested in every place on the planet. But you don't have to go back into history, and you don't have to deal with everything. But there's so many different issues, and these people keep calling me. So there's so many different issues to deal with and so many different levels. And that's why having political scientists, having historians with various expertise, and then having geographers, I think our department, given it's small, can cover a lot of things, and you get overlap. You can cover parliamentary systems, you can cover dictatorial systems, you can cover the history of particular regimes, and you can cover the geography of countries today and some of the issues going on, all up here in, basically 3 different disciplines. So I think that it would be a real benefit for students. You could get the history, the politics, the geographical aspects, and there's going to be a lot of overlap. And I used to do really well when I took a class in totalitarian political regimes, took a class in Russian history, German history, Italian history, and all of those classes were covering some of the same stuff. And then you really start to learn it. And then you know where the ins and the outs are. Otherwise, you just take one class in a subject. Well, it would maybe make it better if you had 3 different classes. So, which is your favorite class of all the social studies?
I haven't really taken a whole lot. I just switched over.
From what?
From middle childhood, which was split into 2. So I took basic history courses, like with Lomax and everything. But it wasn't anything like, I'm going to be in your Hitler and Nazism.
Oh, okay.
Next semester and everything. So that's where I want to get into
great.
more, interesting. Not that everything else isn't interesting, but,
It'll give you more than you had in Western Civ or whatever classes you had in high school.
That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So you've been here for over 30 years. What's your favorite memory of being here?
Well, I don't think I have my favorite memory.
Okay.
There are so many of them, but if I had to pick out 2 things, I'll pick out 2 things. It would be the students and teaching students and talking about things in class. If I just wrote a book that's over 1,000 pages long.
Oh, yikes.
And if I weren't teaching, it's out there in the case.
Mm-hmm.
If I weren't teaching, just doing research would not cut it for me.
Mm-hmm.
Doing it for myself, and then even, you don't talk about the stuff you're an expert on. So it's the teaching and dealing with the subject matter at a different level, with a different requirement, different focus. It's that student, and then working with students, some of my tutors, and some of the people that I work with through Phi Beta Delta, the Honor Society for International Scholars, and the students that have won awards through that, and then another thing that I like is bringing people to campus. I used to have more money at my disposal,
Mm-hmm.
but 7 years ago we brought in the woman. She was a very young woman at one time. She lived in Redwood in California. Her name is Julia Butterfly Hill, and she came and spoke in the chapel. And we picked her up at the airport, brought her in, took her back, and she spent a good part of the evening after we left the chapel over in the campus inn, and drinking, eating, talking to some of the students who were interested for about 3 more hours, and bringing speakers in and turning out an audience, and then talking to these people.